Welcome to the Rational Growth Experience, where every week we talk about how concepts from personal growth and spirituality come together in our experience of our everyday lives.
All right, let's do it.
Stuff. Powerful
Feel
stuff.
good? Feel good?
I'm feeling great, man. Feeling great. So,
Good. All right,
welcome
let's do
to the Rational Growth Experience. This is episode 4, I believe. This is episode
Yeah.
4. Yeah, something like that.
We're cruising along.
Yeah, no kidding. We're just cranking out the content that we possibly can. But yeah, man. How was your weekend? How was this whole week for you? How are you feeling, man?
That was interesting. There was like a very large crash, like very, very large crash outside. Anyways, week has been good so far. I know it's only Tuesday right now, or Monday if you're listening to the podcast. But it's Tuesday and it's second day of the week. First Monday wasn't too bad actually. It was fairly productive. Today was another productive day. I kind of did feel a little bit low energy most of the day. It kind of felt like in a weird funk. Didn't really know what it was. But I just kind of let it be there, and like what we talked about at last episode, just allowing it to be there, realize, I'm kind of in this weird funk. That's okay. And actually for a while I didn't even acknowledge it. Actually, I was just doing, like, I was at the moving job and I was just kind of moving and just doing the task at hand, and I didn't even really notice it. And then I think at some point I stopped, and because I was just kind of like super zoned out or whatever, and I was like, I just kind of feel like meh. And then I finally noticed it and I was like, I wonder why that is. And then after spending some time, I didn't really know why, I just felt like it. So I just kind of let it be there, and then eventually I was like, all right, I'm gonna go do something fun. So like I was just getting off work, and so I went and got a coffee, which was really nice. And then I went and went home and did some yoga, and then I felt really good. And here we are now, a couple hours later. But
Hell yeah, man.
yeah,
You know,
good so far.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think that little break that we just recorded was much needed because, yeah, I definitely feel a little bit more um, whole. I feel good. I feel really good because this week was definitely interesting for me, man. I know that just with real estate going on right now, like I was very anxious, second guessing myself in a lot of aspects, you know, because yeah, I know it's just an uncertain time and a lot has changed, but at the same time, not a lot has changed, you know. And I just feel right now in a point in my life where I'm able to call that out, that yeah, no, I shouldn't be acting like that. I in some sense I don't feel that I have given myself the validation that I need
Mm,
to give myself that confidence in certain
mm,
aspects. And it's interesting, it's very interesting for myself, and just realizing that that everything's going to be okay. Like for instance, yesterday just was so out of it. I was just completely out of it and just didn't know what was going on. um, at night I just was by myself, took a breather, said a little bit of prayer, and I chilled out. I chilled out, and here I am. This day has been excellent. I think everything has been going my way. For whatever reason, I just been excited. You know, I just been really excited. And like you said, I think that I can very relate with that. Like, yeah, I was low vibe. That was not where I needed to be. Um, but right now, I feel whole. I feel very whole.
that's good, man. You said something interesting that kind of stood out to me. You said basically how you decided like that you haven't given yourself that I guess the confidence you needed, or like basically you said
Mm-hmm.
something about the decision. So you want to tell me a little bit about that? Like you said you just kind
Yeah,
of like made a decision.
I guess long story short, our team has come to an end. They have gone different paths, which is totally fine. And I think it all sparked from that decision. You know, leaving has put me in a predicament where I need to figure out for myself on what I'm going to be doing, and putting myself in more of a controlling manner that I can take charge. Um, and it's something sparked in me where I'm just like, okay, why do I keep asking for validation when I know I can do it? You know, I just, there was moments where I felt that it was very, I kept second guessing myself. Just kept second guessing myself in every aspect. Like, oh, am I doing this correct? Am I doing this? But I know I am. And it's difficult for me to explain that. It's just one of those feelings where like clicked. It just clicked, you know?
So you're basically saying that like before you realized that kind of the real estate team was a crutch because you could go to someone for an answer instead of kind of trusting your own intuition and like trusting the knowledge that you've built over the past couple years working with the team. And now that the team's no longer, something in you just basically clicked where you're like, all right, no more fucking around. I got nothing to fall back on. It's just me now. Which,
yeah, and that's uncomfortable with you saying that, in the sense of like I'm just thinking and imagining where I'm gonna be in 5 years from now. You know, like I don't know where I'm gonna be. And dude, that's, I don't know about that, but that's just very interesting for me, and I feel that a sense of excitement. With that being said, just I'm gonna be uncomfortable because I'm starting in some sense fresh, with another team or by myself, whatever the case may be, but I'm going to be uncomfortable. And sooner or later, I'm going to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, if that makes sense.
No, well, and I think you brought up something really cool that we should expand a little bit on with the whole deciding, like the decision portion. Sometimes, at least in this case, a little bit, it seems like there was a decision outside of your control that was made, and then that forced a decision inside of you. And then there's also like probably another instance where you just decided to do something and you did. And so like that's an interesting point because there's two ways that can happen. And to me, this also is an interesting talk about like, oh, what was supposed to happen happened exactly when it needed to, you know. Because if I remember, like not even like a week ago, we were talking about, you're like, hey, I'm thinking of leaving the team. I'm thinking of finding something that can support me on my journey and for what I want to do, which is like get listings and et cetera, et cetera. So someone I want to talk to is the fact that you kind of had this inner like part of you maybe that you're working on that told you, hey, like it's time to start doing stuff for you. You have the training. There's a part in you maybe that you didn't acknowledge yet, but something in you was like, I got the training. I got enough of what I need to know to go out and start doing it on my own. And so you were like, yeah, I don't know, maybe we'll see. And then the team literally just like went away overnight, which is really funny. And then that kind of inner voice kind of came alive more and took over. And so I just think that's super interesting because I think that just kind of goes to the power of like decisions, like making a decision, which is something I can definitely talk a lot about because I've made a lot of big decisions in the past couple months. And so in terms similar to you, like that, now trusting that little bit of that inner voice. And so that's something I definitely want to talk about, which is where that comes from, how to know what it is. Like, did you know what it was, or was it just kind of like this feeling you felt? Or
well, here's the thing: is when I talked to you about possibly leaving the team, I think it might have been a little bit premature, but it was riding on me, like it, you know, just having that sense of chip on your shoulder. I had that chip on my shoulder, like, okay, well, I know I can do it. I know I can get all this done, but at the same time, I was still in asking for validation on if I could, you know. And I think in some way I did speak that into existence because it came to fruition. The team is no longer here, and I have to, one, find a team, or two, go solo. There's no other decisions. And with just that decision on a higher perspective, it's, I don't think that I knew it, but I didn't know it at the same time. Like it was there. It was riding on me. It was like having that sense of weight on your shoulders. Like, you got to do this. You know, you can actually pursue your listings, pursue whatever you want to do. You know, you can do this, but I think I was comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, and that's interesting that you bring up the whole like where that came from, which is the basically the idea of like that you kind of felt something was like kind of like you said, the chip on your shoulder, or it's like I kind of have, at least to me, I believe that we all innately know what we need as individuals. Whether we
Yep.
listen to it or not is a different story, but like what you were saying, you said you kind of had this chip on your shoulder or whatever, you had this feeling you just kind of knew you needed to do something about, or like you needed to make a decision upon, you couldn't just keep letting it go. And I'm sure there's plenty, like I've had my own in times, like one in business recently, you know, with kind of having that feeling of what I was doing wasn't what I needed to be doing. It wasn't good for my growth. It wasn't good for the team's growth. It just wasn't good, but I didn't want to, because I knew if I left, I'd be letting down the people that I initially made a decision or like a promise to, you know.
Right.
And then, you know, there's other decisions, like even in relationships, like maybe you're dating someone or you're not, and something like there's just a lack of communication, or there's something going on where you just kind of have this feeling of you need to share something with them, like tell them, hey, like I don't like that you do this, or hey, this isn't working out for us, or hey, you know, like whatever the scenario is, or even with your family, or even with some friends group, maybe you're like trying to get out of a friend group, or like the way they're acting doesn't make you feel good. And I think what's interesting is like they're like the underlying tone of that is your body knew it was trying to communicate with you, but you weren't necessarily listening, or our higher selves knew and we weren't listening, or whatever you want to call it. To me, I think that's just kind of like your inner knowingness knew,
That
and
gut feeling.
we had the decision, you had the decision to either act on it or not. And so,
Hmm.
and at first you didn't, but your inner knowingness knew, you were already, you put that out there, your energetic frequency, and we can talk all about that. The energetic frequency you were sending was like, hey, I want to do this on my own. So you manifested it just in a different way. The team just quit, so you didn't have to face, you know, maybe the hardship of, hey guys, I know I've been around and been here for the past couple like years, like last year, but now I'm ready to walk away from the team. I'm very appreciative, but sorry, which is always hard, you know. There's always those hard
Right.
parts, but they're like that decision. Like I think there's something so important about people realizing like it is a decision, you know,
Hmm.
and whether you know it or not, there is a decision that can be made. And so and that's something that I'm just kind of super passionate talking about, because for me, I've learned to find my voice a little bit, you know, and make those decisions, because a lot of the times I just wouldn't. I would acknowledge that that thing was there, but I'd always try to turn it back on me and say, oh, it's something that that I have an issue with, so I should work on that. And then I would, but then the feeling wouldn't go away. And ultimately I grew a lot during those times. I just kept pushing past and not listening to myself, but eventually it kind of comes around. And I think there's something so interesting to be said about how if you don't listen, situations will just keep coming up until you listen, and or they'll get worse and worse and worse until you finally get the message. And so
I
that's
definitely agree with that. And here's the thing is that it was a gut feeling. You know, like I think that everybody has this saying like, what's the gut feeling? Like you have that gut feeling when you have to make a big decision like this. This was a huge decision for me because I didn't know what the hell I was going to be doing afterwards. And I guess that came to fruition with just speaking it out to existence. And like you're saying, man, and this might be one of those things where it's a little bit more deep rooted into the idea of my framework. I keep constantly second guessing myself, and it might be in a way that was something when I was growing up or whatever that case may be. I was just
right.
second guessing myself when making big decisions. Um, and that's difficult to say where that's coming from because I think that's something that I'm still learning. But just on that aspect of being judgmental to yourself, and I guess in some sense being self-aware as well, it's interesting. It's very
Well,
interesting.
yeah. Yeah, well, and I mean, let's talk about the things at play here. Like one, you had the awareness of realizing that, oh, maybe not in the moment, but afterwards you realized, oh, it was me making a decision. And it was actually linked to how I struggle making those decisions for myself for whatever reason. So, and that all stemmed from the very first step, which is just the awareness of self. and kind of having that humility to admit to yourself, like, darn, like I still have room to improve. So I think that's just so like cool, and something just to like talking about where awareness is, because I don't have we talked about that yet? Like, what is
Yeah.
awareness?
Nope.
So maybe this is a perfect catalyst into it.
Yeah, it's a good
So
segment.
yeah, so I guess like what is awareness? Everyone says beware, 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 and it's like what does that
Be
even
woke.
mean? And so yeah, be woke. What does that mean? But all it means is, I mean, to break it down in a technical sense, in terms of like the sciencey portion, for those that want a little bit of facts of like how we work and what this is. Basically, we have our brain we have what's called metacognition, which is our brain's ability to analyze its own thoughts. And the easiest way to tell how to do that, if you're not aware of that, is just think right now, what am I thinking about? Like, catch yourself, like, oh, I'm probably thinking like, I agree with what this guy's saying, or I don't agree with what this guy's saying, or this is stupid, or no, this applies to me in this sense. The fact that you just saw that you were having a thought, or thought that you had a thought, and you like were aware that you had a thought, that's all awareness is just like your analyzation of what you're thinking about, which at first will seem super overwhelming, because you'll start catching yourself randomly, and it takes a little bit. It's like a muscle. You got to work, you got to train it, you got to work it, you got to practice it. But over time, the goal with using awareness is to always catch your thoughts. So there's no thought that you have that goes unnoticed. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, today, even what we were talking about at the beginning of this, today I noticed that I was feeling negative, or I was thinking some negative thoughts, or I was just kind of zoning out. I was aware of it the whole time. Like, it went unnoticed. Like, I recognized it and I let it be there. And that was the decision. I chose to let it be there. And so tying it together, using that awareness and practicing it. So for example, this was something I did right off the bat to just start training my awareness muscle. Was when I was driving, I used to have super bad road rage. Didn't know why. I just had road rage. So every time I had road rage, I would catch myself. I would, like, it was something like I told myself, like, okay, every time I have road rage, just notice it. Like, I didn't do anything else. It was just kind of like I kept the little mental tally. And what you'll start noticing is, when you do that, when you decide on one thing, again, you made a decision, I made a decision to be aware of my road rage habits. I started noticing how often I was having road rage, and I was like, holy shit, that's a lot of road rage. What's going on there? Then that's where, what you were talking about, Eric, is where you can start analyzing and understanding, like, where that's coming from. And now there's a whole process for that you can go through. I think everyone kind of has their own, but to me, at least, the way I see the process is, you have your awareness, you become aware of it. You are aware of how often you're thinking those thoughts or doing these things or whatever that you're trying to become aware of is. Then you can start asking yourself, why? Like, why is this? Like, why am I doing this? Or what is this coming from? Where is this coming from? Then you can start asking yourself like those questions. And you probably won't know initially, and again, it's like a muscle, you got to keep practicing, but you'll start. At least the easiest way for me to explain, like, where to start looking for your why is, like, what are maybe some traumas, and maybe you're not aware, what are some traumas that I've had in the past that I know in fact like impact me now? And by that I mean, like, oh, maybe I had like a bunch of, like, not a good childhood growing up, and so my parents were abusive or whatever. And so maybe there's a whole list, and this is where just doing some research of your own can help, of what is having a traumatic past, like abusive parents, lead to in personality structures. So as you're reflecting, you can research and learn that, oh, people that have gone through this tend to act like this. That sounds like me. Or if you're just like, what, or underlying meaning of, like, go into Google and type in underlying meaning of this, and you can see a list, and then you can look through the list and see, oh, that makes sense to me. Because it's like, we're probably not all aware of, even I'm not all aware of every single past thing I've gone through that is probably impacting me today. I'm actually reading a book right now that talks a lot about our developmental stages as children and into adulthood and how that makes an impact on us where we are now. But that's stuff that's
Hmm.
happened like when I was at 0 to 3 months, even like there's stuff that can happen in those first 3 months of being alive that can shape who we are 24 years later for me. So it's like,
Yeah.
so the whole point of this is understanding awareness, having that first step, which is awareness, asking yourself the why, go back, understand where it's coming from. And when you understand where it's coming from, you can say, oh, that's actually coming from an old frame of reference or an old way of being. And then you can decide, oh, I don't want to think like that anymore. I don't want to feel that anymore. And then you practice every time you notice you're thinking like that, you practice allowing it to be there, being okay with it, acknowledging where it's coming from, saying that's okay. And maybe if there's a lot of pent up emotions, let them out. Like this is a time where you're going to fully like grieve the experience or whatever it is. And so be okay with that. And then say, okay, I no longer want to do this anymore. Because at some point, like it's, you can look at like the study of the grievance process and how that at some point it's you just inflicting pain onto yourself. So once you allowed the process to like go through and have its full release, and I feel like we all know when
Jesus.
that has ended, then
Hmm.
you decide every time it comes up that you don't want to think that anymore. So obviously this is easier said than done, and it just takes a ton of practice, because it's like once you start catching how, at least for me, once I started catching how often I was negative, like thinking very negatively or feeling very negatively, I was like, God, like I am not good, you know? And so I was kind of beating myself up over and over again. And I was like, no, it's okay, you know? And I just kind of let it be there, but I just kept going because I knew it could be better. I've seen the results of other people. I was like, I know like where these people are at. I know it works. I've seen brain scans. I've seen how all this, like all the facts I could ever need to know. So I just kept, it's like a formula in a way. So I just kept going. And now here I am. I am aware of when stuff happens. I understand mostly where it's coming from. I'm still learning, you know, I'm not naive. I know I still have tons to learn about myself. And
Right.
obviously that's why I'm still learning, but, and then making the decision to think and
And
feel
we all
differently.
do. Yeah, no, and sorry to cut you off, but we all
No,
do
you're
have
good.
to make that sort of decision. You know what I mean? And I think that there were some good points that you touched on, just acknowledging of what you are feeling. You know, because that's huge. That is super huge. Acknowledging what you are feeling. Like I think in simple terms, this can be explained as going through a bad breakup. Like someone that you were dating for 5 years, and it's that grievance process of like, okay, this hurts. Next stage, okay, I'm feeling better. Next stage, move on. You know, that's just in simple terms. I know it's a lot more complicated than
Yeah.
it really is. But really, when it comes to being self-aware, for me, it just means like you're aware of how you're feeling right now, and you're aware of where you're at, physically, mentally, spiritually, wherever it may be. You're aware of that, and it's definitely an interesting topic because it the way I feel with this in making that huge decision was it hurt a little bit because that's just one of those chapters that I think I have to have that sense of closure to move on to the next one, opening a new path. Um, but I mean, when it comes to making decisions like that and just being self-aware that you do have to move on and create this next chapter, opening it up. Well, what does that look like? You know, what does that look like with starting that, and how do you know on, okay, well, this decision is such a huge decision that I have to close this door in order to go to this one. So feel free to chime in on this. So like what does that look like, and how can being self-aware, how are you able to manipulate that in creating your own being of opening up a chapter or whatever it may be, but what does that look like?
Are you asking like how do you use awareness to make the right decision, or like make
Yeah.
the decision even though knowing the consequences and where it's from and all that? Like how do you use that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's what I'm kind of trying to say is just like how do you know when you're making the right decision? And that's
So,
difficult to say.
well, yeah,
But
and this is
what's your
an
opinion?
interesting topic because it's like right or wrong, you know, like the whole duality. And I think that in and of its own is something to talk about. But I think the important part that you're asking here is the whole how do you know if the decision's right? Which I think this is where using awareness, like you, the whole reason of awareness is one, you get to have, you're kind of like having control over your basically your life, you know. You're aware of your thoughts, you're aware of how you feel, and if you're aware of it, then you can make the decision to change it. And so the
Mm,
only thing that the kind of way I see awareness is it's knowledge. All it is knowledge. And it's easier to know and make a decision, or it's easier to make a decision when you have as much knowledge available to you. You know, it's like
mm,
a way to explain it is like, what if you're investing into a property? You're investing in real estate. There's two properties you're going to invest in. One, on the outside, it looks beautiful, but you don't know anything about the inside. You don't see any pictures. You know what the price is, but you don't know. You haven't had an inspection or anything done on it, so you don't know what's wrong with it, but it looks pretty. Versus the other house, doesn't look that good from the outside. You have the full inspection. It's perfectly in shape. Like everything checks out, other than just some cosmetic things, and the price is the same. So if the price is the same, and now you just decide. So if you're not aware, if you don't have the inspection information, that's your awareness. If you're not aware, you're going to look at, okay, what's the face value, which is, well, the price is the same. This one looks better than this one. So I'm going to go with this one, which obviously that would make the most sense. That's the only information you have available to you. So of course
mm-hmm.
you'd go with the better looking one. But say introduce information, you know, oh, I actually just got an inspection on this really pretty house. Foundation's shit, and the water's leaking, and the house looks like it's going to cost like another $100,000 to get the foundation fixed. And then in this one, you have the understanding that, oh, actually everything's in tip-top shape. It's only going to cost me $400 to get a new paint job, and then it'll look just as good, if not better, than the one over here. So all awareness is just knowledge. And so if you're using the knowledge and the awareness that you have about yourself, that's, I mean, that's enough information to decide if it's a good decision or not. And then that's where we go back to, you know, the whole self-confidence thing. And maybe that's where,
Right.
I think that's what you're touching on, is like, how do you know if it's right for you or not? And, or it's like, how can you trust that decision? And that's a different question, you know, because it's like, in one case you're asking like how to do it versus like how do you trust, which is a different question. So how do you trust it, I think, is just experiential. It's different for everyone, but I'd say it's experiential and training, just like you're training your awareness muscle. You had that, like touching on what we had talked about earlier, you had that inner voice, that knowingness, and now you had an opportunity presented to either act on it or not. So you're training yourself to trust this voice or not, even in like smaller, like let's just look at a daily sense here. Like, for example, like yesterday, I was hungry. I was like, oh, yeah. I saw Wendy's. Wendy's sounded so good to me. I haven't had shitty food in a while. It just sounded so good. But I was like, nah, I don't know. I want to eat healthy. It'd make me feel better, blah, blah, blah. And then it just kept not working out. And I eventually go to Wendy's and I felt so good about it. But however, if I just chose to trust my gut instinct, that was like, yeah, dude, go to Wendy's, and realize it wasn't an impulse. It wasn't just like some fucking thing. It was just like, no, go to Wendy's. Instead, you know, I drove a couple miles away, started going there, and then having to go back because I forgot something at the store. And then I was like, still just as hungry. And I was like, fuck it, you know, like, I was like, I should have listened to it in the first place. That it was nagging on me the whole time, you know? And so it's like, we all know the thing that we need. I think we do. It just takes training and
Intuition.
practice. Yeah. And intuition to me is something that can be trained. Like everyone
Mm-hmm.
has it. It's just like we're not choosing to acknowledge it. And so for me, like I'm training mine super hard right now. So like every decision like that, like if I want Wendy's, God damn it, I should just listen to it. And I'm just deciding to go listen to it. Or if like I want to take a nap right now, maybe I should listen to it. And maybe that's just part of my journey. And that's something I've learned about myself that I lost, was my whole intuition with myself and my trusting of myself. And I can talk about how I learned about that, but that'll take a while. But
And intuition really touches with the gut feeling as well, and also with being self-aware. You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's just having that self-audit. I think, for at least my opinion, is having that self-audit of yourself and just realizing like, okay, well, in that certain situation. Oh, and here's a good idea. I mean, when you're in the shower and you got into a fight with your best friend, you have those, oh, I should have said this, I should have said X, Y, and Z. And then, but you can't go back because that was your gut feeling, like, I guess that's what
Right.
I'm kind of touching on, that subject of the self-audit in that sense,
Yeah.
but also with the intuition, having that intuition.
Well, and self-audit, and then also being okay with that as a decision, because it's like, even though we have awareness, that gives us the ability to decide, which is kind of the topic of this episode along with awareness, but to decide. So we might be aware that that's what came up, or, oh, fuck, I should have said that, or, oh, I should have said this, but it's like, whatever came out was probably perfect for what it needed to be right then. Even though you wanted it to work out a different way, it worked out the way it did for a reason. And so like probably taking the chance, like time to be okay with that. Like, and that's something that I do a lot, because I'll analyze situations far past like the event has already happened. Like I can be a year later and thinking about something. I'm like, oh, if I did this one thing, but it's like, no, like, yeah, think about the other side. Like if I didn't do that one thing, or let's say I did, then I'd probably turn out a different way, or I wouldn't have had this experience of growth or whatever. And so it's like, it's like put it into perspective, like entertain the idea of what if you went the other way, and then, but have the humility to admit that like you're wrong, like you could have been wrong. Like even if you said that, would it have really helped in the long run? Probably not. That's something I noticed a lot of the time when I reflected back was, would it have helped? No, it would have helped short term, make me feel better. It would have helped with that moment, but it wouldn't have helped long term, which ultimately, like I think that's the thing that matters the most. And it's like how much we've grown since those experiences. And now we're being super broad, but this is just information to take and try to apply to like your own personal experiences. Because at the end of the day, I can blabber about mine, but all I'm really doing is just sharing my own experience, so you have something to kind of grasp and understand, like, oh, that, well, he experienced it like this, it's kind of similar to this experience I had, like having that, oh, it's similar to this, like that's the whole point of this, is just like taking that information and be like, oh, it's similar to this, and trying to understand it and how it applies to you, because it's all a personal experience.
Exactly. And we're touching on that subject, and at the end of the day, this video was more on the being self-aware and having that sense of decision and when to make it. Like, in short, I already knew I had to make the decision of switching teams, but something in me was blocking me from making that leap. And at the end of the day, team ended up closing. Well, now I'm actually going to be fulfilling what I have to fulfill. Any final thoughts, Dylan, on with regards to being self-aware and having those decisions and creating those decisions?
Yeah. Be patient, 100% be patient, and be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, because if there's one thing that I wish I would have done earlier on in my journey, is just been patient with myself. We talk about these big concepts, but for example, the real estate team decision was what it took you from the initial thought of leaving to now was what, 6 months?
Give or take. Yeah. Give or take.
So it's like, and for example, like me leaving the team, like leaving the tech app team, that it took me 8 months.
Yeah.
And it's like be patient, like be patient with yourself. And like, if you have something that's nagging on you, it doesn't go away. Clearly, like, look at us, like 6 months later, 8 months later, we finally made the decision. So it's like, be patient. Like, it's not always clear from the start. It's like, we tell you this information, but it's like, even with the information, the situation isn't always clear initially. It will get quicker and quicker. like I can tell you, like definitely, like I can now I'm starting to realize things like literally in minutes or seconds. I'll understand like, oh, this is this. I see that I'm operating from this old way of being, and it's causing me to think this way when really my gut reaction was this way. And so now if I realize I'm acting this way, now I just jump this way and do the opposite. And so it's like, just be patient and be okay with failing, because ultimately, like, you might look back and be so hard on yourself, because I know I was like, I'm still super hard on myself. Like, oh my gosh, I'll beat myself up so much. So that's why last episode I talked about just being like how to overcome that, essentially, like how, like what to do in the moment when that's happening. And so, and if you didn't watch that, I would recommend going back. Very valuable information. We even did it at the beginning of this, just like a little calming exercise to get us prepped for this episode. And maybe we can clip to it, just showing us sitting there in silence with breathing and stuff. But yeah, so be patient, be kind to yourself, and practice lots of practice, because ultimately that's all it is. It's just like going to the gym. It just mental reps. All it is, mental reps.
It really is. And I guess there's always those topics of analysis paralysis and just being so judgmental towards yourself, you know, because this all plays in. Keep in mind, like, these topics that we're talking about has its own meaning. And here's a good way to explain it. Plant the seed, it sprouts, grows. Well, the branches are really what is going to be those little topics that we're talking about. But really what the foundation is these big major topics that you really have to do your research. Again, these are just our personal experience. Take it however you like. And on that note, I think it's coming to an end for this podcast.
Definitely.
Well,
thanks,
have
everyone.
a good night.
Hopefully you learned something.
Later.